we graph, what we talked about yesterday is kind of making our list of the information we need. So we need an amplitude, period, count by, and then we were able to draw the graph from there. And the amplitude is always your coefficient, but it has to be positive. So our amplitude is positive 3. Come join us. Okay, so the amplitude is 3. The negative in front, do you remember what that makes our graph do? Yep. Period, normal period for sine and cosine is 2 pi. So to get your new period, you do 2 pi divided by the coefficient of x. So this would be 2 pi divided by pi, which is just 2. And the count by is always your period divided by 4 for the 4 quadrants. So we're going to count by 1/2. My amplitude is 3, so my high point is 3. Low point is negative 3. And we're starting at 0, and then we did a total of 5 points, so 0 being the first, so 4 after that. Counting by 1/2, so the next one is 1/2. 1/2 plus 1/2 is 1. Plus 1/2 is 3/2. Plus 1/2 is 2. The graph of cosine starts at its high point, which is 3. However, this graph flips, so we're going to start at negative 3. And then we're just bouncing back and forth between the lowest, 0, and the highest. You could always get those points just by plugging them in. You know, if you forgot the pattern for cosine, you could plug in a 0. Negative 3 times cosine 0 gives you negative 3. If you plug in a half, negative 3 times cosine pi over 2 gives you 0. So we're just using the pattern to save time, but you could always go back and plug them in. I did ask for 2 periods. So to get the second period, you just need 4 more points on the end. And you just keep adding your count by. So 2 plus 1/2 is 5/2. Plus 1/2 will be 6 over 2 or 3. Plus 1/2 is 7 over 2. Plus 1/2, 8 over 2 or 4. And the pattern continues. So you could do as many periods as I asked for. I will typically only have you do 1 or 2 periods, but and we can see, looking at this graph, it is 2 periods. There's 1, there's the second. So it goes through the complete cycle. Any questions on that? The last thing in section 1 is trying to work backwards. If I give you a picture of the graph, figuring out what the equation was. So when we have this, we kind of have to start first by trying to decide if we have a graph of sine or cosine. And we can look at the starting point to tell us that. Sine always starts in the center and goes above and below that. Cosine starts at its high point typically. This one started down at its low point. So would this be a sine or a cosine? It's a cosine, but it was flipped because of it started down low. Okay, so what makes a graph flip? A negative. Okay, so we know it's a negative cosine. Then the number in front of cosine is our amplitude. So that's your high or low point. So our amplitude here was 2. So negative 2 cosine. All right, now we just have to figure out what goes with the x. So we know when we find period, that's how long it takes until our graph repeats. And if we look at this graph, it had to go all the way to 4 pi before it repeats. When we find our period, we do 2 pi divided by the coefficient of x. So that meant 2 pi divided by the coefficient of x had to equal 4 pi. So I'm just going to solve for this b. So we divide by 4 pi. 2 pi over 4 pi is 1 half. So it's a -2 cosine of 1 half x. So one more like that. So, first question is this sine or cosine? Sine, because it started in the center. Was this one flipped? No. What was our amplitude? Okay, so it has a 4 in front. Alright, I graphed this all the way to 2 pi, but the period is how long it takes until it repeats. If I look at this graph, what happens after we get to pi? It repeats, so my actual period was just pi. So period is 2 pi divided by the number in front of x, and that equals pi. So we can multiply over b divided by pi, and we get 2. So this is 4 sine of 2x. So that's the end of section 1, and I gave you those problems yesterday. I want to start 4.2. Do you want to work on these first, or do you want me to do the 4.2 notes first? Okay. So the 4.1 homework is due on Monday, and we'll have some time here in a minute to work on that. This one we're going to start, but we're not going to get through the whole thing. So we want to start looking at how to shift our graphs with sine and cosine. So we're doing all the same things, but we're just going to add to our list of information. You might hear me talk about a phase shift, and that is just a horizontal translation, so moving it left or right. And the argument is where we're evaluating the trig function. So if I say sine of 2x, my argument is 2x. It's what you're taking sine or cosine of. So, if I asked you to graph this, we are going to do it the same as we started with the others. So we're going to give our amplitude, period, count by, and go through all of those same things. And then there's a couple different ways to think about it. We wrote down phase shift, that's how much left or right do you move it. I have a somewhat easier method for finding that out. So we're going to add something to our list of information. So our amplitude here, the coefficient is just 1. Period, normal period for sine or cosine is 2 pi. Divided by the coefficient of x is just a 1x, so our period is 2 pi. The count by is your period, 2 pi, divided by 4, for the 4 quadrants, and we get pi over 2. What I want to do next is an interval. The interval is where our graph is going to start and stop. That's going to be a little bit easier than trying to think, okay, I move everything left or right this much. So normally when we graph a trig function, we start at 0 and we end at 2 pi. What I want you to do is in the middle, we're going to put this argument, which is x plus 3 pi over 4. So if I wanted to get the x by itself, we would subtract the 3 pi over 4 from everything. So I get negative 3 pi over 4 less than or equal to x is less than or equal to, you can use a calculator if you need to, 2 pi, that's like 8 pi over 4 minus 3 pi over 4, which is 5 pi over 4. So now we're going to draw our graph, but it's going to be a little bit different. We're not starting at 0 this time. My interval, my first point is at negative 3 pi over 4. And to get the next one, we add our count by. Now you can do this on your calculator, you just don't do pi. So negative 3 over 4 plus pi over 2, so plus 1/2, is negative pi over 4. If you add 1/2, you get a positive pi over 4. And this gets a little bit tricky because we're trying to make sure things are still spaced evenly. We need a total of 5 points. So then if we add our 1/2, 3 pi over 4, add our 1/2 would be 5 pi over 4. And notice that's where we said our interval would end. So you start on the first point of your interval, and your 5th point should be the last. Right, this one had an amplitude of 1, so pi point 1, low point negative 1. And now we're going to draw our graph. So this was a sine. So the first point in my interval is when I start, so that was when my graph was 0. Sine goes up first, so at negative pi over 4 you'd be at positive 1. Pi over 4, we're back to 0. 3 pi over 4, you're at negative 1. 5 pi over 4, you're back to 0. So our graph looks like this. Just took it and shifted it over. Is that one alright? Let's do one more and then I'll stop. So the interval, you could do it anytime, but you have to do it if you have something added or subtracted with your x. What's the amplitude on this one? 2. And the negative tells me I will period. Normal period 2 pi divided by the number in front of x, and we just get 2 pi. Count by is period divided by 4. So pi over 2. Interval. So we normally go from 0 to 2 pi. And then in the middle, we're going to put our argument, which is x minus pi over 3. So we add our pi over 3. So positive pi over 3 less than or equal to x less than or equal to 7 pi. 2 is 2, so we go 2 above and 2 below. My first point is not at 0 this time, it's at pi over 3. It's about 60 degrees. And to get my next one, we have to add pi over 2. So if you're doing it on the calculator, you'll do 1/3 plus 1/2. You need a total of 5 points. So 5 pi over 6. Okay, plus 1/2 again. Pi over 3. Plus 1/2 again. So that would be 11 pi over 6. And plus 1/2 one more time. And that's 7 pi over 3, which is where it should end. That's where my interval ended. Okay, we are graphing cosine. It normally starts at its high point, but this time it's flipped. So remember, the first point wasn't at 0, so at pi over 3, my graph is at -2. 5 pi over 6, we're at 0. 4 pi over 3, we're at +2. 11 pi over 6 is 0. 7 pi over 3 is -2. And so then we have our graph. Alright. So we'll add to this Tuesday, or add to this Monday, and it'll all be due Tuesday, but the 4.1 is for Monday. And one thing on the 4.1 homework, when you get to question like 21, I think it says to graph it from -2 pi to +2 pi, just do 2 periods. You don't have to